Greatly honored, yet deeply humbled. I am honored to introduce to us a scholar, a minister, a principal, and above all, a lover of the Tongan people in terms of our history. Reverend Dr. Geoffrey Cummins and Anne Cummins will speak to us tonight about a window, and through that window he wants to lead the people of Tonga in the most significant part of history, which are the sources. And in fact, we cannot write history without sources. Reverend Dr. Geoffrey Cummins was the principal of Taupo High School in 1966 to 1973. If I may touch on part of the history he left and his legacy in Tonga, he produced a generation of students who were at the time caught up with Pentecostal movement in Tonga. And in fact, there was a time when there was a new kind of way of life for the youth to engage with. And his students went to the place where this group of people lived and pray on the street at 5 o'clock in the morning. And in fact, he invited me, or I interviewed him and asked him for permission to write an article about it. And I have the article and I'll give it to him to approve it before I publish it. Dr. Geoffrey Cummins is a historian, and I think he is the historian who knows more about the Tongan people than any other historian that I know of beside Dr. Alfred Harold Wood and his daughter Elizabeth Wood Allen. He wrote his master thesis on school and about schools in Tonga. If you want to read his master's thesis, you can go on internet, you can get it through Trove or from the ANU Pacific Manuscript Bureau. There's a copy there. He wrote his PhD thesis on Dr. James Egan Moulton. He also produced volume 1 of the Sources of Tongan History, which for that work he won him an award from ANU Canberra. The main reason of his visit to Tonga, and for this particular public lecture series, is to open up windows of opportunity for students and people of Tonga who are interested in studying history, and academics who wish to explore more about Tonga history and Tonga issue. May I invite the Reverend Dr. Geoffrey Cummins to come forward and let us put together our hands to welcome him.
I wish to acknowledge the words of honour and respect that have been offered to honoured guests here this evening, including to Dr. Javier, the principal of the college here. And I thank Dr. Paula Javier for the introduction I wish to say at the outset that it's like building a ladder where you put the different rungs in the ladder that you are building. I have only put in a few rungs at the bottom. You can walk up those rungs and then you can build the rest of the ladder. I'd like you to have that in mind as I speak this evening. But last Saturday, Anne and I drove out to the western tip of Tongatapu here, to that historic spot where John Thomas and Mr. Hutchison first landed and established the Wesleyan mission there. And we looked out across the bay and across the ocean and saw all the beautiful islands. And we realised we were on a very special part of the country as far as the Wesleyan Church was concerned and the work that we were doing. But then we went across to the other side and we experienced a great display of water crashing against the shore, as the blowholes on that particular day were quite spectacular. And as we stood at the shore, we realised that we were seeing something spectacular quite close to us. The waves crashing and the great spouts of water. But if we lifted our eyes and looked further out, we could see the greatness of the ocean. This evening we will be talking in a way about a few things that we can see close to us, and they might be spectacular and beautiful, but they are only part of the story. We are always encouraged to lift our eyes and look out to see the greatness of the ocean. Some years ago, when I was at Tabo High School, it is true, as Dr. Latu has said, we put together Sources of Tongan History Volume 1. That's up on the internet too. Lee Harkness asked my permission and some time ago, and that can be searched up on the internet. That work was done at the high school. The material was typed up, and I still remember the day when we had 400 pages of that document to put together. And I invited students to come to the school if they wished and help me to put those pages together. And I said to them, if you come and work on that Saturday, I will provide some food for lunch. I had plenty of volunteers. And to encourage them, at the far end of the room, I had placed a large stack of bread and tins of beef. And the work was done quickly, and we enjoyed a great feast. At the present time, Anne and I are working on documentary material that could be used to stimulate and encourage high school students, college students, students of institutions to look a little bit further into the history of Tonga. As Dr. Latu has said, it is hoped that a few windows can be opened which will offer opportunities for further work. And the collection, as we've had on the screen, is to be called Sources of Tongan History, Volume 2. It will be a collection of documents and extracts and contemporary opinions in Tongan cultural history, focusing on language, learning and literature, 1616 to 1865. The volume's been called a collection, and that acknowledges that there is a mass of material out there, and we have just made a selection of what is there. As I said before, we often stand and look at things that are close to us. Our hope is that what is said tonight will help us all to look even further out and be encouraged to venture in that direction. The collection of documents is divided into 3 parts. The cut-off point is 1865, and that is quite deliberate, because in 1866 there begins the history of the church, in which Dr. Moulton and the students of the college of that time were involved in producing a mass of material for the next 40 years. That needs to be the subject of another volume in itself. We are looking at that earlier period. Let me first of all raise the question of language. And section 1 will trace the progression from Tonga's ancient oral language to the beginning of language in a written form. The early explorers, Dutch, French and British, began recording Tongan words, and in Captain Cook's case, a simple vocabulary was put together. And then William Mariner in 1805 became a resident here. And when he went back to England, working with Dr. Martin, he produced an extensive vocabulary and the first dictionary, really, of the Tongan language. The process of committing an oral language to a written form occupied a great deal of the time of the early missionaries with their Tongan assistants. And these assistants were often chosen for their knowledge of the language and the culture, and where possible in the documents that we are putting together, credit is given to those language assistants who worked with the missionaries and helped to produce the Tongan language into a written form. Looking at section 1 for a moment, we will see a little of the development of the written Tongan language. There will always be challenges in the way we learn our language and the way in which we express it, in everyday situations and in teaching and in learning. Thomas West a missionary here from 1846 to 1855, and famous for what we now know as West's Bible, tells of his experience and the assistance that was given to him by some Tongan teachers who were supporting him. And I read from his own records. He speaks of a Sunday going to the village of Makavu. I was accompanied by a few of our best Christian teachers. Among them were Johnny Fafita and Johnny Paula. When about a quarter of a mile from the village, Fafita stopped us by asking whether we might not pause and pray that God would assist his missionary and also to bless the word about to be delivered. As West says, the proposal was no sooner made than it was acted upon. We immediately kneeled down by the roadside under the shade of overhanging trees while Fafita poured forth a beautiful and a powerful prayer. He prayed that the Lord would, quote, soften the lips of the servant's mouth. He meant make it easy for him to speak, because he was going to be speaking in Tongan. To enable him to speak correctly, and also that he would open the hearts of the people to receive the truth that was spoken. And West says, after such a preparation, it seemed hardly necessary to say that the service was a time of blessing, as well as of mental excitement, and that it was a truly great time for him, because he said from that day onward he preached the unsearchable riches of Christ in the Tongan language, with the exception, he says, of one or two occasions when he was laid aside by sickness. And of course he worked on the language from that time on, and worked on the translation of the New Testament and other books and so on. An extract from John Thomas's history also gives us an illustration of the range of activities that had to be carried out by missionaries in addition to their work on developing a knowledge of the language. And I quote from John Thomas's History of Tonga. We have commenced preaching in 3 small villages a few miles from Nuku'alofa. One is called Havelu, another Whang, another Hofor. At each place we have a few earnest men and women who attend to the things of God. Also there are many children. There is a great desire for books, and as the missionaries have to write them, and the supply is very scanty, what with attending to 2 large schools daily, meeting classes, visiting and preparing medicines for the sick, attempting translations of the Word of God to be read and enlarged upon at public worship, learning and writing the language, and writing and correcting and improving books for the schools, and other things. The time of the missionaries is fully taken up. I've opened a little window there about the way the language developed. The missionaries and their Tongan assistants, who brought the language out of an oral tradition to a written form. Look out beyond and you will see there's a great deal more to that part of the story. Learning is the other major section of the documents that we are preparing. The making of schools. It touches only briefly on some aspects of the development of an educational system, from early informal contacts with European language through to the establishment of a formal school system. The first Tongan word was written down in 1616, I believe. It was when the Dutch explorers, Schouten and Lemaire, called at Tongatapu in 1616. They met the chief of the island, as they called him, and noted that his people called him Latu. I believe that's one of the first Tongan words that was brought into the English language and was made available to the rest of the world. The London Missionary Society's missionaries came in 1797, but they didn't establish schools, and they were caught up in the Civil War, and so their time here was not really productive. Walter Laurie came in 1822, and he brought a schoolmaster with him, and there was the hope that schools would be established. But again, for various reasons, Laurie went back, the schoolmaster stayed, but the schools did not develop. The pioneer Tahitian missionaries, Hape and Tawheta, were the first to set up a school in Nuku'alofa. And the Tahitian language was the means of instruction, and it was also used in public worship. They had with them Shonilangi, who had been living in Tahiti, and so we can assume that he was the one that helped the Tahitians and the Tongans to communicate with each other. They began that work at the same time that Hutchison and Thomas arrived at Hihifo. But let me open a window or two about the importance of education and schooling from the point of view of Tabo I. Tabo I was a keen student from the beginning. In 1830, he'd heard about what was happening at Nuku'alofa because Turner and Cross had come to support Thomas and Hutchison, and they had moved in with the Tahitians, and the schools and the church began to flourish there. Tauwhahau came from Hapai, saw what was happening, went back and sent a message that he needed a teacher, and as you would all know, Peter V was the one who was sent, and within a few weeks Tauwhahau was able to read and write. All that is well known. But what perhaps is not quite so well known, that about 20 years later, in 1850, in September 1850, Tauwhahau placed his son Vuna in what was then the training institution in Nuku'alofa, the forerunner of Tabo College, and he wrote quite a lengthy letter to his son Vuna about the importance of education. I'm going to read you the English translation. The letter was given to Mr. Amos, and Mr. Amos translated it into English, and it has been published in some early books. Let me read you this letter, and as I do, I think you will get something of the feeling of Tabo I, something from his heart, something from his mind, something of his attitudes about education. It's dated the 23rd of September 1850, Lifuka. George Vuna, my son, I write to you to make known my love to you, to your face. I cease not to plead for you before the Lord, that he would make you wise in those things for which you have been left behind at the institution in the Nuku'alofa. I urge you, my son, to attend greatly to the work for which you are there. The business which devolves upon you there is great, mighty, difficult, but it is a work which in excellence surpasses all the occupations on earth. It is a work which belongs to man and that leads his mind to the Lord and has to do with his immortal soul. It is a work that is profitable during a man's life in this world, both to the Lord and to our fellow creatures. And then he goes on and says something about the attitudes he wants to see in, and the behaviour that he wants to see in his son Vuna at the institution. He says to his son, if you remember me and your mother, attend to what I am now writing. Everything that Mr. Amos tells you to do, attend to it. Mind that you be not disobedient in anything that Mr. Amos speaks about. Take heed that you do not destroy or injure anything in his house. Vuna was living with Mr. and Mrs. Amos. Beware lest you be rude to his son. And if in any way you be disobedient, it is right and proper for Mr. Amos to correct you. See that you keep in remembrance this part of my instructions and attend to them. And finally, he speaks about a few kind of housekeeping things for his son. He finishes his letter with these lovely homely words. Your things which I send in this canoe are as follows. Your bedstead, mosquito curtains, 3 hats, soap to wash, your clothes, hairbrushes and a turtle shell comb, some pieces of print to make your dresses, your clothes, with the cotton belonging as well as the needles. And then he finishes up. Request Mr. Amos to write me your mind as to whether you are advancing towards wisdom or how you are getting on. I share that amazing letter. There must be many other letters of Tabo I, because once he learnt to write, he wrote often. We stand here at the moment, as it were, near the edge. But when we hear that letter, we're asked to raise our eyes and look out beyond to an ocean where there are probably other great and deep things. He concluded his letter by saying, "This is the end of my writing. I am George Tabo," and he signed his signature. Taufa Hau's letter referred to here is from a copy in a book that was published in England in 1855, Sarah Farmer's Little Book. Tonga and the Friendly Islands it was called. It's up on the net. You can go into Google and find it. And you can read that English translation there. Anne and I are going to England in 2 weeks' time. We're going to go to the archives there because I think we will find amongst the missionary papers, we hope to find some treasures from the deep. The first native training institution was actually set up in Ngāiafu Vava'o in 1841. Vuna was sent to the second one, the one down here in Nuku'alofa. And there's a record in Farmer too, in that lovely book that she has put together, because she used to go into the mission office in London and read the letters from missionaries, and that's how she wrote the book. It's a secondary source in a way, but it's full of primary sources as well. And here's one of them, about the institution that was established in Vava'o in 1841. On the 3rd of June 1841, the Reverend Francis Wilson met the preachers at daylight, as usual, to give them their appointments for the coming Sabbath, to answer their questions on passages of Scripture, and to assist them in making the outlines of their sermons. This was at Ngāiafu. At the close of the meeting, it was found that there were several people had been sent by King George to set up a house for a new academy. The missionaries had decided that they needed an institution. The king had given orders that it should be built free of cost to the mission, and his people had cut the timbers before bringing them from the bush. The house was smaller than Mr. Wilson liked, but the timbers being all prepared, nothing could be done about that. Perhaps you do not know how short a time it takes to put up a Tongan house. After sunrise on the 3rd of June, the grass was growing knee-deep on the site for the new building. Before the sun went down, the walls were raised, the roof was thatched, the house was floored with mats ready for occupation. It had neither doors nor windows, merely an opening at the side and the end, which served the same purpose. Mr. Wilson determined on having desks and benches, quite a new thing in the islands. But how could that be done? They must be made. There was no timber on the station. However, the students went out into the bush. They cut trees, made them into planks, and with the assistance of Messrs. Wilson, Turner and Kevern, they made some strong, massive and durable school fittings. Just one other word about the making of schools and of learning. It's a teacher's letter from Nua'uwha'o, written in 1853, and it gives a dramatic picture of the dangers at times the dangers of being a teacher. Elisha Tabo was in charge of the day schools at Nuafa'o, and in a letter to the Reverend Mr. Amos down in Nuku'alofa, he referred to the following event in these words. Mr. Amos, I now make known what has happened to this land. On the 24th of June, 1853, 3 dreadful earthquakes shook the island in the night. The earth then opened and swallowed up a village. 25 persons were consumed in the burning gulf, together with their dwelling houses and the chapel. 18 escaped to the mountains. A great part of the land is destroyed. We all expected death and prayed for the coming of the John Wesley, the mission ship, for rescue. That story is in Thomas West's book, 10 Years in South Central Polynesia. You can go into Google and find it as well. That's just another little window that opens up something of the amazing story of the Tongan teachers who were involved in teaching all over the scattered islands, which were known then as the Friendly Islands. The third section, and I'll finish with this. The third section of the document collection concentrates on the evolution of Tongan literature. It began with portions of the Bible, which were translated, and a number of hymns. Scripture portions were printed by the thousand, and there were hymn books, which were revised and added to every year. And with increasing literacy, catechisms, orders of service, basic church history, all of these things were being prepared. And between the years 1847 and 1853, an important series of books were produced. Catechisms, printed in Vava'u in 1847 and 1853, a substantial book with 190 hymns, again printed in Vava'u in 1849, Geography of the World and Geography of the Bible Lands, printed in 1850 in Vava'u, Morning Prayer and Other Prayers for the various seasons of the year, including Good Friday and Easter Day and Pentecost, and dozens of prayers for the church year. That's a modern copy. I went onto the internet. I paid my small amount, $35, and I got 5 of those books that I've just mentioned to you. The hymns, the morning prayer, the prayers for the seasons of the year, the geographies. The printing press led to thousands of books being made available for home and school and church. Again, Sarah Farmer in her book gives us a picture, and Mr. Woon was one of the printers, and that's another great story. The men who came as printers and the Tongan men who learnt the printing as well. Thousands of books were produced. And in the month of April 1831 through to February 1832, just about a year, Mr. Woon printed the following books. 2,500 copies of a first lesson book. 3,000 books. Number 2, containing lessons from the Old and New Testaments. 1,500 hymn books. That's the 1831 hymn book. Just a little book, but with these wonderful hymns in it. 4,000 catechisms. These books were most eagerly sought for and were of great use in the homes of the people as well as in the day schools. The demand increased so fast that in the course of 9 months, 17,000 books had been printed. And the supply of paper furnished from England was nearly exhausted. They had run out of paper. The Training Institute of Vava'u had made its own contribution to the development of literature. And there's a lovely little piece about the institution there when the Reverend Francis Wilson was the principal in the 1840s. And it spoke of the papers and the lectures that those first students at the Institute wrote. And we read this. The Bible is our reading book. This is the institution in Vava'u in 1840s. A chapter is read at each meeting, and then suitable explanation of difficult passages are given, a small geography of Canaan, and the places mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles has been introduced in manuscript, handwritten one, with maps of Canaan and the countries visited by the Apostles, an outline of the geography of the world, along with maps of the world, a small book too containing the English words found in the Tongan books with their meaning in Tongan, and an important little phrase here. In preparing these books, we were indebted to Mrs. Tucker, who has devoted a great deal of time to these things and who left us her books. And as students of this theological college, this is what was said of the students in Vava'u at the Institute in 1840. Hear this. The students have written a short course of lectures on the leading doctrines of Christianity as held by our Wesleyan Church, following the order observed by the Reverend Dr. Hannah. So the students of that institution were writing lectures to be used in that school. The development of the hymn book, I've talked about it already, but I'll say something about it just to finish. The first hymn appeared in 1828. Just this little book, it was just a few pages. It was printed in Sydney in 1828, and it had some hymns. And the first one, remember the language is just starting to develop. It was headed Himini, number 1, and Sihova Omatu Ikoi, Hokinofo Lotalangi, Hokongawi Katobe, Aimea of the Fuana. Sorry about my pronunciation. The first hymn book. And then in 1831, lovely little book, beautifully preserved. I think there's only one copy that I know of in existence in the State Library in New South Wales. It's got 58 hymns in it, and it begins in a similar way. Sihova o mea tui koi, o ke nofo lotolangi, koe nohi kato be ai mea o whanuani. And then the hymn book of 1838, a beautiful little hymn book. This one belonged to Mr. Tucker, one of the missionaries. He had a special cover made with his name on it. He didn't want to lose it. Again, beautiful hymns. How many? Turn over to the back and you find hymn number 106. 106 hymns. Again, they start to develop the language. Koe eike a Sihova o hevani mo mamani, ko hatau o tuia, ke te awha kumi ai. There's a great avenue of studying the way in which the language developed from those early simple words, hymn by hymn, and slowly expanding, and you will be able to, and in this one here, of course, the 1849 version as well. And then there was another hymn book in 1861. What a great story, inviting you to look out to the great ocean that's there and see what treasures can come from it. The Documents Volume 2 will hopefully offer some encouragement to students and scholars at a number of different levels. It is hopeful that here in this college, when papers and essays and theses are being written, there will be increasingly opportunities taken to seek out some of the things that are hidden at the moment, but are there to be searched for and discovered, and will take us into new areas of learning and research. Talking about Tongan history last evening, two words kept coming into my mind. I was at the high school, of course, and my excuse for not learning Tongan properly was that I was teaching every day in English. And those of you who were my students know that I usually taught every lesson of the school day. But there was a word, a thought kept coming into my mind. Sia'atoutai. And I said to my Tongan friend that I was talking about, a word's coming to my mind, Sia'atoutai. He said, I think it comes from a hymn. And he said, yes, it does. It comes from hymn 427. The last verse really is about what I started with, about standing at the edge of the blowholes and watching the great columns of water coming up and marvelling at them. And then we lifted up our eyes and we looked out at the vast Pacific Ocean. And we thought, how much more is there? And so I want us to sing that hymn, and particularly that last verse, Sio Tangata Sio Ki Amuiatu. Let's sing hymn number 427 to bring this lecture to its close.
Tala whaduri se tofua. Pe lako rofia. Ha pai veu ke mana huila. He tohi mawhala atu ai e sirika. Kama iki ko mau wala whaiwa. Reverend Dr. Geoffrey Cummins in Anne. This is one of the most difficult tasks for any student of yours. It's almost near impossible. However, I'm quite delighted to have the opportunity to bring the response. The principal just ordered me half an hour ago to do this. I think because he was too tired. Anyway, I think it's quite fitting. Perhaps I'm one of your earliest students here tonight. And for that I salute you, my principal. Still, it's not an easy thing to say. However, we are very delighted. I have heard and read bits and pieces of your 2 lectures before. Your lecture at Dubois College, what I said to you that I'd like to translate because many of your students asked for it, former students and also other people in the church. But this lecture tonight, I think, is the highlight of this. As you have tried to share with us the development of the knowledge in Tonga and the education. In 1845, as you know well, Tongatapu was to be installed as King of Tonga, Tongatapu, and also the first Christian King of Tonga. And before he left Hawaii, he came to the back of the boat, the hippopoa, the karia, and he said to the people of Hawaii, he said, my people, Te Wawa'u people and Tongatapu people, there's no more war on this land. For those of you who still want to fight some battle, you either swim or get on the boat and go to Fiji or someplace else. Because there's no more war in Tonga. There are only 2 things in Tonga, and that is Latu Moiako. Latu and Ako. Dr. Cummins, what you have brought to us today, tonight, is an affirmation of that prophecy of which King Tubo I was very fond, and he worked so hard, as I read in your book. First, no Palangi should rule Tonga. Second, that all people should have access to education. And you've done well with us tonight, and thus I want to thank you. 62 years ago, Reverend Dr. Cummins, I remember it was not a philosophy class, it was a class with history, a mix of history and religion, and you told us, and I still remember, you should be happy with your old students who have a good memory. You told us of the Kantian imperative. Always act in such a way that you can also will that a maximum of your own actions should become an international law. And of course, we ask you to explain to us. We finally had some time with us and told us what Immanuel Kant meant was this: if and when you do something, make sure that that's the best thing that can be done by anybody in the world. If you're trying to clean the pot, make sure that that pot becomes the cleanest pot in the world, that whoever in the world wants to clean pot must come to Tonga and ask me how to clean the pot. And I still remember that, and thank you, because what you have done tonight and through your writing is to share with us that imperative. Last but not least, since education came to Tonga, as you have written and propagated in your work, it was never to be an entirely secular education. what we have got here, first of all, the first premise is believe in Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior, and then you become poto. Because if you don't, you remain as a body. And brings me a quote from Archbishop Anselmi in century 11. He said, Lord, I do not attempt to comprehend your sublimity because my intellect is not at all equal to such a task. Yet I yearn to understand some measure of your own truth, which my heart believes and loves. For I do not seek in order to understand, but I believe in order to understand. For I even believe this, that I shall not understand unless I believe. Dr. Cummins, my dear former principal, and your lovely wife Anne, we wish you well during your time here in Tonga. God bless you, and when time comes for you to return to Australia, let me say the farewell from Hawaii. There's a governor of Hawaii. Elo fia e ko tatau ko Hawaii no ko waru. O kumia si foi fata pe teu heka waka pe teu kakau. Pe kau ke tukia hamu hekau. Teu whakate te lo si kehe ke wau. Tōta hei ki Tongatapu, awe pōpō ki pe tala mo hekau. Isa koe hanu e he si toa ko tua ki tau. Na ko ke lia ke au heo lau i tau. Ka koe ku kore koa si foi kukuwaru. Ore ko koa. Tatari koa ke au fuka pe au. Pe whasi tata mua tu lau. Iro he waluru mo riku waru koe tāanga ko si whakapau. O si matuai he api ko kau. Te slai mi mahatu kai tau. Ka teu turi he mai la ahe koe tae manonga se ko wha. Te whake tō riki tonga, maku teunga ke heostea, ngaru whaani ko kai siana. Teu papa he ala whorau ko he awara. Toka o nei mate ka koe wa. Ka kato he haka halau. Teu tāke i hatafu. Teu ia mo ka wafu hina mo alia pero kau. Teu whehu he kia hina he kau tapu. Whare ha ke ria na karuku polu pe mo aha. O kui whea hau. Koe whea hapai mo se ko kau. Isa mea pe ako i Tongatapu kaulau pe au ka kakalana ia kato whakatau tau. Ka tukua ke te ngihia e whakalala whanga. No whaakau koe tangata. Tukua ke awa wakai si kolo ko wela ta. Whai anga ia tau anga he whakatamaki e whanua. Uhi ngai a liu kawa. Kauhalalalo mo kauhalau ta. Kauhalalalo nai whai. Nai whakatoa wha. O whai ki haapai matahua. Mata riri tahabea haapai mamandu roa. Riri roa.
me lawa e koe o whakaawa hake whukoroa o tanu pēia I e senturi. Pea mo senturi, te upepea kua. Koe tuku lau mea a ki mautolu kau whaiwhekau. Bislare kai hini. Pea kuke hawa o wholahi historia koe he pōni. Pea ku maumata visone, ki he visone koe nai a moritoni, pea moi visone koe nai he tui. Ai na hanga koe o whakahaha, whakaari, o tau ke whaihai I kawa I civilise a Tonga. Monu nai maarohi au pito atu pōrua kia. Neo ngā whainata nai hoko he ngahi tau ki mui. I he taimina e hopo hake a misa peka o hopo ki he politikare. Kanai kai ke tuka ai whina aoia o I hui. Tonga, mā Tonga. Pea koe lelei kahatoa koe o Tonga, o lava te ia ke whai e Tonga ai I nasi koe o kuhoku he ngahi whanua muri. Lava pehe ata mai Tonga o hako a kahi o loto koia o e civilise e lava ke whakakoro aki. Ai ka e civilise Tonga ni. Ko o pea mai he pōni, uke hanga toi wholahi mai a historia koia. Ke mau mata ia ki mau tolu o kamata ke whawhai hifo. Kai koe whawhai hifo e he tau. Koe whawhai hifo e nia I he ilo koe Tonga ki mau tolu. Our Tongan identity is questioned. Ko hanga o la vei I horea. Nā ke hanga whakaama aria e ki kupu I rea is lost. Mōre pēia, mōre mea ia o nofo ia he ngahi lei pēhi. Nā whanofo e ngahi archives, a uki Britannia. Pea kuke tala mai te toe alu ki Britannia, o kumi e mea koe ia. Whamaro ata o pito I he pō whakakoroa koe. O whamaro kia I he tokoni lahi aia ku whai. Whainata ke mauha taha hake ko koe, pea moho o interest lahi I he mea koe uke whai. Ko he wike mau hatakoni hange koe tokone ha ke pō koe. Kia koe pōni o kou whewhehu I atu ai whewhehu I koe. Koe lolo tongani. Koe anga koe makaya mo tuatu ani. O whaka au hifo ai mo ui whakatonga haina. Civilise whakatonga. Koe ngākena civilise koe whakatonga I a church ki culture. Pako ke sio whakakaratoa kia I o ke hūhe matapā o e ako. Kai hūhe matapā o e tohi. Ko mauro koe mautohi koe I Sia'atoutai ni he taimi. Koe pāngo e re whatonga. Pea koe mautohi koe ak mautohi kau whaiwhekau. O kōki au pito e maure whatonga. Hange ke te au, o whahai hifo ai tente tia tongani. Pea koe mea koe mahino ki ai, koe whanua civilise maa alungai. O selecting ai civilise a tongani. Kai ke nauhanga omi doa hangea. Ana e high quality ko ia tu po ua. High tu po ia moritoni. Pea koe te mea mai he pōni o toi whaka tokanga kai te mautou. Koe klasiko tongani identity e. Ai nei asiko ia moritoni. Ai nei mamahiri koe te pōua ki, koe ni ku tōia hau e aho ni. Koe ne lele koe ni, te mau au ki whē I he kahau. O kuai ai whē tōhua ki he ahoni, ai tō tangata whōroa, ka moe tō tangata o e ako o e aho ni. O mamahe ua ati, ke he generation de whānau, ke he generation de mātua. Ke he mea kua ko I he whānau, mo rau e te he mātua mo tau ka mei. Koe ngahi whakare tesi koe o whai koe I api. I ahota aho koe. Kai ke kei tāria he whānau, tau tāria rau tōru, ai ngahi rei sori whakasai e nisi o asi he aho ni. Pea mahe ai mea. Koe mea koe uia I mana mahe e alu ki whea tonga he kahau. Ku ke pehe he aho ni o lost.
One of the great things that Tabo I said, and I'm just repeating, I suppose, in some ways what has just been said, but Tabo I at the opening of the Parliament in 1882, he said there that if the language and culture of a land is lost, that land will be lost. If the language and culture of a land is lost, that land will be lost. That was a very wise saying from a very wise king. And I know we've been looking at things of the past, of a long time ago. But out at Tabo College on the night of the music festival, when the president of the church wanted to say some words, he mentioned at the beginning of his speech, he reminded us of that great word in the New Testament, in the chapter 11 and 12 of Hebrews. That chapter in Hebrews mentions all the great people from way back. And then the writer to the Hebrews says, seeing we are gathered around with such a crowd of witnesses, let us, as it were, in our day, let us, he said, run the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. So I've been talking about things I link up in a way with that writer of Hebrews, telling the stories of great people from the past and then bringing it right down to today, the day when people were reading that and saying, seeing we are compassed about by such a crowd of witnesses, let us now, in our day, run with determination and perseverance the race that is before us. I shouldn't start preaching, I suppose, but I can't help it.
But there is something that I think there is a big debate, especially in schools now, and that is whether it's more important to make sure that we teach our children to be very well versed and in English rather than Tongan. And from what you had shared in our first lecture about Tongans who were genius, and they were Tongans, and it seems to me it is very important that Tongans are formed well in their ideas and thinking in their own language and culture before they learn other cultures. And that is, I understand the policy of the Tongan government education system. But I'm certain that many of the educators who are here tonight, who are also developing new curriculum for our nation, there is this persistence that we need to make sure that our students from a very young age can handle English even better than perhaps our own Tongan language. So that is something that perhaps I would like you to comment in relation to how you had seen Tongans learn at the very beginning, especially going advanced in the further education. But my main interest in listening tonight is that how can perhaps we relate, or we need to relate what we would say our Tongan identity. What is our Tongan identity? And I think the windows you opened tonight I could see there's a lot that we need to identify as Tongan identity as far as education development is concerned. But also to relate that to what could be the destiny of our nation from God. Could you please perhaps respond to that?
There is a balance. There is a balance. When I came to the 50th anniversary of Tabo High School, I had the opportunity on at least 2 occasions to make a particular point, and I'm reminded of it again as Meliana has spoken. At the celebration of that 50th anniversary, there were people everywhere with smartphones and iPads, taking photographs and sending messages on Facebook or Twitter or whatever else. On the one hand, but on the other hand, there were wonderful presentations of mats and tapa cloth. There were Tongan dances, there was Tongan songs, and I saw at that celebration the ability to have a balance between the new things and the old things. Now that's not easy. But in question of language, there are peoples in the world today who have lost their language and who are only just now trying to get it back again. There are many, my daughter, Leneva, these days, she is a lawyer. She works in Western Australia. And as a Tongan and a trained and qualified lawyer, she spends her time defending Aboriginal people who have got into trouble with the law. And one of the things she tells me is that one of the difficulties is that a number of the peoples that she represents are out in what are called the homelands, and they've lost a lot of their own language, and they're halfway between 2 cultures. And some of them are trying to get their language back again. They feel that something has been lost. And I don't know how that can happen, Meliana, in practical ways, but I think that the people who are working on curriculum could be asked whether it is something that should be considered, not to take the balance too far one way or too far the other, but somehow or other maintain what is truly the Tongan identity on the one hand, but work to find ways of coping with a world that is increasingly in the internet and smartphones and everything else operating in the English language. So I just offer that as a thought for those who are planning. How can we keep a balance? That's why I keep coming back to Bo, the first comment. Very wise. Now, he said that at a time when there was, in his day, increasing contact, yes, with the European world. And he was saying, be aware, The country that loses its language and its culture ultimately will be lost. So look for the balance.
My name is Elauna and I have been in this college for 28 years. Most of the time we just come to this church and hear the sermons and let developing languages and things like that. But tonight I feel that we should try to develop something from this college. What amazes me is the government of Tonga started at Mama'u with all the development of education, hymns and everything like that. I remember just reading the Code of Mama'u, 1839, and most things were done in Mama'u. So I'm really glad to remember that we should write a history, maybe starting things at this college, maybe really digging in, developing our old languages, getting all the old languages and develop things out of it. And maybe stop the students writing in English, but translated them into English so that we'll be able to do the Tongan language some credit. Thank you.
If the documents that Anne and I are working on, we've got a lot collected already. There'll be just a little offering to you, perhaps to take the steps that you are speaking of there, because the documents that we're gathering, some of them can be easily found too on the internet. That's why I've mentioned the internet tonight. But there are others which are harder to find. This little hymn book, for example, of 1838, very hard to find. That's a copy of it. So if we can offer just something for you to think about and start to develop the kind of policy you are looking at, we would be happy to be part of that. Thank you.
A question I have of personal interest is in 1793, Malaspina spent 1 month in Tonga from Spain, and he brought with him artists, people that specialised in astronomy and linguistics as well. And I was just wondering if you've ever come across literature that comes from the Malaspina voyage.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Just two things that come to mind. Yes, Malaspina, when we were here for the 150th anniversary of Tabo College, after the celebration was over, Anne and I went to Vava'u for a couple of reasons. One is that all those years ago when my first child born here in Tonga, Nicholas, was born, Taufa'au Tabo IV asked me to come and see him, and he said he would like the boy to bear the name Tokio Khmer. And at that time I didn't know much about Tokio Khmer, but I found out a lot about it afterwards. And it was very special. And I wanted to go to some of the places that Will Mariner, Malina, had been. But also I wanted to look at the harbour in Vava'u, because Malaspina had been into that harbour, I believed, but also my great-great-grandfather, Michael James Cummins, was sailing a ship from California to Sydney in 1852, and he called in at Vavau to get some supplies. So I wanted to go to that harbour where my great-great-grandfather had been in 1852. When I lived here in Tonga, I didn't know that. But when I came back, I wanted to go to that place. So it's a roundabout way of answering your question, but to say I have an interest in what you're talking about. Malaspina did call here, and I'm just wondering whether a book by Robert Langdon, who was for many years with the Pacific Manuscripts Bureau in Canberra, Robert Langdon wrote quite a good deal about the Spanish in the Pacific. So if you go in and see what book was written by Robert Langdon, it would be something like the Spanish in the Pacific. He dealt a lot with matters to do with the Spanish, and he believed that the Spanish introduced pigs into the Pacific. So there's some interesting things you can follow up there. The only help I can give you is to say, have a look on the net and have a look at Robert Langdon's book, see if you can get a copy of it. And he wrote articles as well, I think in the Journal of Pacific History, arguing that the Spanish had a lot to do with the Pacific. Not many people believed Bob Langdon, but he wrote some fairly convincing material on that subject that may help you.
I hope you will excuse me for speaking for the second time. This time I'll try to express some gist of what I've been talking about in English and also in Tongan for the sake of those who don't quite understand English as I am. I want to pursue the last bit of the saga that before the first said in the words there. That land will be lost. You have spread before us the classical contributions of the missionaries, not all of them I should say, but the ones who made the significant contributions have been in line with what the first said and persisted in pursuing it throughout his life. Now, I want to ask, is there any encouragement, any hope for us in the present day when the journey is on the twilight zone, speaking about culture, speaking about land, speaking about every aspect of cultural life, institution. Those of us who sit on the fence and watch it, we are onto the lost point, completely lost. Our identity will not be counted in the future. We will fall into oblivion. Some people have dug up the story of the Pacific and say there was a continent here that was lost and was called New. Now, if people persisted in investigating, as you persisted in saying this is classical contribution of the missionaries in Tonga, can it be revived? Is there any hope for us in the future, in the present, to revive that? We are talking about it in church. Holy Spirit, as if we are simply saying, Holy Spirit, do it, we will watch it from the fence. No, we will take our part. Now, what are we taking our part in? In helping the culture to disappear, or helping revive the effluence of the culture, and then Tonga will be remembered as making significant contribution. I don't know. This is what I heard, and I wonder if you share somewhat this one with your insights through the windows that we have been talking about, through language. It's significant that you investigate the whole aspect of culture from just one small window.
Anne and I go back to Australia tomorrow night, and on Sunday I have a service, conduct a service in a village not far from where we live. Anne and I live in a small village of only 300 people in Australia, and I've got to go to the next village when we go home to conduct the worship. And I am going to preach on that chapter 11 and 12 of Hebrews. I come back to it because I believe there's something in biography, in looking at the lives of people who have sometimes lived a long time ago. I believe there's something in biographies that can inspire and enthuse and encourage people. And again, I go back to the writer of the Hebrews, who was trying to encourage early Christians to remain faithful, and he began telling them stories from the past. Story after story in chapter 11 of the book of Hebrews. And he finishes that list of people by saying, time does not allow me to go on to talk about, and he says this one and this one and this one and this one. But he says, we are surrounded by such a crowd of witnesses. Therefore, let us run with perseverance the race that is before us, casting off the things that drag us down, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of the faith. Now, I was hinting at the lecture at Te Loa when I talked about the Vita Tonga Mahinoa, when I talked about the Vita Finau, Christiani Kolo Finau, Sione Haver, Lezieli Tonga. I was hinting that there are biographies there. There are biographies. Little books for a start, perhaps, about those people. Because those people, just as the writer of the Hebrews said, look at all the people who went before, look at them, and they are with us, they're surrounding us, therefore be encouraged. And so I've given you the answer, I suppose, of a preacher, but also of one who has looked seriously at history and has been encouraged by those who went before. So I offer that as a weak response, but a response to your big question.
Tapu ke hawhia do mahmahi ko ke kufanga ngai katapu tope. Ko e whai maregone whai whamaro. Hui ko e ngāo e tau I kota he pōni.
Ka ke roto ke tau mātuku mo e whakaukau tau lost. Koe ko whiwhia ke patungia ina ton ke whai e tiu talahi. Ura ki whaparo ke koris kotu bō, ko nau tolu whuk na nau tolu e whakawhikoin, pe me pōkalama pia e koris kotu bō. Ka heko lau koe whuipu whuko kurahi, koe ne overflow ana, lawea TTI, lawea Sia'atoutai he pōni, kau ton peke whailonga, whamaro ki ai. O kau pe whaiga mea pehenia he whotutu ki whamanatu tauange au e lotu, ka ne tia ki ahafu mahino whau, ka hanga te au maa rewa ki matangi, i he ngāwe ko whai koris kutu bou, mo i tau hoko mai ke whai hano whakau kaui. Kai me ngahi major league kia mo ngahi major event, ai u kaua ien tau toki lava ki ai. Ko maudoro koe i he ni u kai me mau ki maina mea maudoro whai pe a hen. Koe te mau hoko atu ka kumou toa mai ka ki whakatau ke atu. Ui ke ua mi heni, e te whai pe ki tānoa whai maudoro, whawhai pe pe kau koistu tuku, ke whai e wakai ki e ngahi tūkonga o e whanonga whaka ekumenikare i he region i he Pacific. Pe whai e ki whawako ia i he pulele ua mi eini. Ui ke ua hoko mai ai, o se whawhi he korisi, whekai aki mea mo e Maytag, ke tāre e whatonia na tūmai konferenisi ke whai e tokanga ki he climate change, ka ko pia kene tō taha o ne whai organisation ko ia. Ko ia i ui ke ua katoa pe, pui katoa pe e kore korisi, e ne kawako tutuku, e nau whok mai ke hoko atu e whangi tānoa i ki koe. Ka ko whamala tau bitu, whakawhi tō mo atu, ka ko whamala bitu mo lau mai, ko e ke whanua, ka mai mamahi o e lotu, ka mai a ko whoki, tau i nasi he pōni. Ka maro ke tōn pure, ka mai HOD e mau tawha ke historia, tō tā Paula Latu, e lawa whotutu e patungia o e whiwhini. I was saying I was not supposed to be the one to offer the vote of thanks, but since no one will argue with me, so I take the opportunity, because I hate seeing everyone leaving this place with the lost idea. So, one of our great hymns, the 441, Tamagelo Totoa, have faith and do the right. You go down to verse 4, it has these words, O atuka hameamua, do not be discouraged of all things. O alpha, half all, do not be surprised of new things. Just have faith and do the right. And I think as you leave tomorrow, we pray for the blessing of the southern winds and the kindness of the weather to accompany you and your good wife home. And while we are parted, you go back with Hebrew 11, we will stay with him 441. And we will not be discouraged, we will not be surprised. We will keep the good faith and do the right. O whāna pino, o ke tāpaki tau toru e tō mākumaki. Iwa ngai besi rugby, me besi whātaha, tau iwa tūka kai pia.
Oh
whamaro ki ngahi mea ofa, o whakateo ngā kai mo ui, poto mo ilo o fō mai he tangata eiki, mo whainga maari e whanonga kai te ia, e manawa e ilo, e moi manat, e moi visone ko hiko e kaha. Maro ho mi kau whakaf, mi siasi, mi whanua, e ngai tapa ke he kehe o society, mau fia ka whailoa ake. Pasen maroro ka mai kovana, tanga wānu kunuka, pau ki heina e korisi, mo ki mau tolu mono ngai kau mea. Pe maulo tu tāpua ki mai mua e patungia, ko mau ikuna. Whakao ngai a, ke mau tui, mo mau whai totonu. Ke wana mau fo, ona mau waf, ona mau tuka. Hangahi mea mua, hangahi mea mutua. Pe ona mau hanganoa ve mo mamata, mo ofo, i hangahi mea o fo. Tuku pe mau tolo ke mau noho pe, o tui pe, mo whai totonu. Tāpua ki mai a, whahoi tuirui mau tolo, rodongan, ka maa ka hauna. Lotu e mau whai wafa sisu klais ko aro, ako mau whamui. Pero keresa ek mau whai doa, mo whehe lau mare maanioni, ka tā tolo koto ia e pōni, pia whai tua tai ngata. Amen. Malo, kada korisi o mea toa, o mea whewhaka ko ai.